In continuing our Monstrous Love series, we are talking about another film from 2024. What a year for horror films. Hits and misses, for sure. But we're talking about Your Monster.
Yeah. It was very cute. I liked it. That's my spoiler for...
Yeah, I liked it too.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything I expected. It was very emotional. I felt really infuriated watching it, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
I felt like my monster wanted to come out while I was watching it. I was like, I'm being triggered right now. I'm so mad at her. And like from like a place where like I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
You know, and I know people who've been there. I know people who do those things. And I'm like, you want to shake them. You want to be like, just why are you doing that? But at the same time, you absolutely can understand that as like a trauma response or just like how you keep people pacified and safe and comfortable by, you know, pushing yourself down. So it's a very obvious metaphor, but a very fun mask that they put on it. And that it's also a great just blending of genres. But why don't we hop in and let me tell you about your monster, and you tell me in the comments when you subscribe that you liked it or you didn't. What you got from it, what I may be missing. So Your Monster is from 2024, last year, and it's about after her life falls apart, soft-spoken actress Laura Franco finds her voice again when she meets a terrifying yet weirdly charming monster living in her closet. It's a romantic comedy horror film about falling in love with your inner rage, and it's directed and written by Caroline Linden. So just like that synopsis, Your Monster is a film that crosses genres, blending romantic comedy, horror, and drama to explore the toll of keeping our emotions locked in a closet. And the story follows Laura Franco, who is a talented young actress who's facing a tough diagnosis, cancer. And to make matters worse, her boyfriend, Jacob, decides to call it quits while she's in the hospital for, again, cancer.
Yep.
Okay? And he's just like, you need more help, and I can't do that. I'm going to be responsible for you. I'm leaving.
Isaiah was just like... wow, I hate him. I hope something horrible happens to him, is what he said when we were watching. I was like, yeah, same.
And I mean, like, it is, like it's a comedy, so the way that it is like, so absurd it's silly, but it's
very over the top,
far from what happens to people, but So then after surgery and feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges, Laura retreats to her childhood home, hoping for a bit of peace and maybe some clarity, but instead of finding comfort in her old space, she discovers a bizarre and terrifying presence, a monster. The monster, which is trapped in Laura's closet, is oddly endearing and strangely relatable, and he explains, like when they meet, the other moments in Laura's life when she'd summon him, because clearly Laura has been struggling against this neglect and pain for her whole life. Like, he describes 3 distinct situations in which she brought him about, and it's very clear, and like as we see later, like what he helped her with, it's like, oh, okay. These are moments when she couldn't keep that bottled in. And so we find that she's skillfully tampered down on her rightful outrage and becomes a convenient, quiet doormat for those in her life. Her mother is absent, despite Laura just undergoing cancer surgery. Her baby. And she's just not there. Like, we don't even see this lady. We don't even she leaves food.
Yeah, it's a really testament to the neglect.
In her house. Crazy. Her only friend pops in and out, always distracted by something more important. She's like, I gotta do karate. And I'm like, what is this obsession with karate over the health care of your best friend? Or your friend?
Best questionable.
Friends, also questionable. And even her ex-boyfriend, who abandoned her in the hospital, is moving forward with his musical featuring a character he created for Laura, except now Laura isn't the star. The character's name is literally Laurie. Just change the last letter.
He's so creative.
Oh my god. And so as Laura grapples with the physical and emotional toll of her illness and her fractured relationships, she develops an unexpected, intense bond with Monster. And the more time she spends with him, the more she realizes it's not just a figment of her imagination, but a very clear representation of her deepest fears, her unresolved rage, and her struggles to come to terms with her own identity and power. Because Your Monster is a tale as old as time, mirroring the storyline of Beauty and the Beast. The monster even looks very much like Beast. Only Laura isn't Stockholm syndromed into falling in love with an out-of-touch prince, who in turn learns to treat the help as people and not objects.
Whoa.
It's not about him. He doesn't have growth. He's a tool, right? Instead, Laura, in growing her relationship with the monster, learns to accept and make room for the darker parts of her. And she spent so much of her life shoving parts of her down in the closet to placate others that it's literally killing her. And I'm not saying, like, that's what the cancer is, but, like, the lack of support and, like, care is only going to harm the fact that she has cancer more, right? Yeah. She's not going to advocate for herself.
Yeah. Scientifically, it actually does.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying that's what her cancer is from. I'm saying it doesn't happen.
Yeah. That's funny. I said the same thing, like, later, so it's really funny that we're both like, it didn't do it, but, like, it did.
But also it did do it.
Made it bad.
So, as your monster progresses, the film, well, your monster, I don't know what your monster is doing, but as the film Your Monster progresses, it skillfully blends elements of horror and humor to explore deeper psychological themes. It's a perfect blend of laugh-out-loud moments and genuinely heart-wrenching scenes, effectively using these shifts to mirror the internal conflict of Laura. Like I said, screaming at the screen, because I was like, girl, grow a spine, you jellyfish.
Yeah.
And so as she's grappling with her own trauma, the film emphasizes not just the literal monster in her closet, but the figurative monsters she's been suppressing within herself. And this relationship with monster is Laura's self-reflection, pushing her toward emotional healing and self-empowerment. And as Kat and I said in the beginning, it does lead to her making some rash, aggressive decisions, which happen when you've bottled everything up and you haven't had like a controlled burn situation where you are releasing those in a very natural and cared for way. So then you end up exploding and causing really irreparable, life-altering damage that could have been avoided. Like maybe we just don't do the musical, we do something else.
Yeah.
But
maybe make a better musical, because like you could have told the story better than he ever could.
Yeah, even Monster was like, this is like, if Monster is her, Monster like roasts this thing. He's like, this is pathetic. It's not even a good story. It's not it's not good writing. It's not like anything that's good about it was you in the first place.
Yeah.
But her not being able to carve a space out for herself in that world is also like, it's both indicative of like her behavior and like how she closes herself down, but also like is a very competitive world that's not going to let girls like her do it.
Yeah.
And again, as someone who's been denied job opportunities because I'm too nice by men in the industry, I get it. I get it. Would I murder someone on stage? No. No, I wouldn't do it if I'm really mad. Got better. I'm in therapy. Yeah. Anyway, in the musical, so it's also part musical, this film, because she does have her musical number, which is like really fun and brilliant, and it's something you're amped at, like, because you hear pieces of it, you see it being rehearsed, and so when we finally get her last act, you're really waiting for her version of that song and for her to bring it to life, and that scene kicks off where a character in the musical is just like, that's what's wrong with girls like you. And then she's like, what's wrong with girls like me? So this is essentially what my part of our episode is going to be about, because it is an exciting time to be a femme Latine horror lover, with actors like Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera taking on empowering and distinctive roles as final girls. And Barrera has been thriving in this horror genre, surviving Ballerina Vampire Assaults in Abigail, which is also released in 2024, and having had led the new era in the Scream franchise along Ortega as the final sisters. TBD, what's going on? Because rest in peace, Scream franchise. Good to me. In his name, like, why would you? Anyway, that's for a different day. But she had done like a decent job there, and it's clear like she has been carving out a space as one of those like final girls. And I've discussed in previous episodes the deep love Latina communities have for horror and how we make up a significant portion of the horror audience. So it's been refreshing to see that representation, not only on screen, but behind the camera as well. Like, shout out to Fede Alvarez when we just did Alien Romulus. So they're out there, you know? And I think it's also super important that she is Laura. And even if it was like, just like, it absolutely could be that she was hired because she's a brilliant actor.
Yeah.
And the intent was not to have any commentary on the fact that she is a Latina woman, that she is a Mexican actress. Could be completely not the intent. However, by casting her and having her lead it, it also added that extra piece, and then other representations that are happening on screen also contribute to that. So in an article on Refinery 29, Melissa Barrera's Your Monster emboldened me to embrace my feminine rage. Writer Sofia Aguilar shares, there are a few great female horror villains like Mrs. Voorhees, Carrie, and Jennifer of Jennifer's Body fame, but rarely are they Latinas, despite the fact that we arguably have more reason to be angry and rageful. We faced and been forced to survive generational trauma, state violence, microaggressions, and cultures of abuse, just to name a few. Yet, Latinas and other racially or ethnically marginalized women are relegated to side characters that die off well before the credits roll, which I think is why having her at like the front of the Scream franchise after just like white women for a long time or just killing off black ladies, and also like Jenna Ortega being like the lead of a lot of horror as well, is so important. And I think having Barrera as our star in this film, we get to see the notorious Latina anger bubble up to the surface. As a Latin femme presenting person, much of my life, the Latina anger has been like a threat or like a reference. And I was like, if anything, my anger is from my Scorpio. Like my treatment of it is probably my zodiac sign, and also trauma. But I oftentimes, like, even my mother will just be like, just let the Latina out. Like, girl, what do you mean? You know? What does that mean? So I think that this idea of Latina anger is a fury that's been festering to the point of affecting our own well-being, all because society and culture have taught us we don't have permission to express it, because when we do, we become that trope. Or just another angry brown person, right? And so Laura's identity as a punching bag doormat isn't exclusive to Latina women. Okay, it's something many femmes and women experience overall. So it is not that I don't think was its express intent. I think it's just elevated. So from a young age, we're taught, like as women and femme folk, to minimize ourselves, to take up as little space as possible with our bodies, minds, and words in order to accommodate others. Like literally sitting with your legs crossed versus man spreading, you know, having to have a coworker say the same thing you just said out loud so that people now think it's a good idea, right? Like, these are cliches we've heard before, but it's literally like what you're ingrained to do. You're soft-spoken. Women are seen, not heard. And so it's a constant argument that I have had with many of my fellow and women friends to not be kind. And I was like, don't be kind. No one, like, be kind for sure. But like in instances where someone is unkind to you, do not feel like you need to be kind. To assert themselves and their needs. And so Laura's silence and placating is a distinctly feminine curse. And so, like, I do want to say that, like, this is definitely, I think the intent of Caroline Lindy was, it's hard for women out here, because it's somewhat based on a true story. Like, I'm sure this is like her lived experience. However, having it be Melissa as our lead, and then having the presence of two white women as antagonists in Laura's story is significant. So Jackie, who is the talented actress, she immediately secures the role of Laurie, a role that was literally meant for Laura once she shows up. And the casting department makes no effort to hide this, letting it be known that the other auditions were just for show. They're like, yeah, we'll do that, but don't worry, hun. Right?
Yeah.
And Jackie does reveal herself to be a true girl's girl, opening up to Laura about her own struggles as a woman who, despite her perceived power, was abused and taken advantage of. So I do like appreciate that kind of twist that's happening. But she is, for all intents and purposes, the antagonist besides him in the film. Because we see her, we don't know that. She doesn't know that. She doesn't even know she's the antagonist. And then Laura's only friend, Maisie, didn't even have to audition. She was given a role because of her connections, and we find out other things. But she's also terribly performative, where, like, in her friendship, like, she picks up Laura from the hospital because that's what friends do, but then she quickly departs despite her friend being in great need and still recovering. Like, her friend is like breaking down at the table, and she's like, gotta go to karate.
Yeah, she just like hits on the doctor instead of like saying anything to her when she gets there. She's just like, "Oh, who are you?" She's like, "I'm married," and she's like, "Ugh, okay, fine, we'll leave."
Yeah, she's supposed to be like quirky friends, which, you know, I will say, like the Refinery 29 article is saying, like, in other horror films, like, Melissa would be relegated to that role of this shitty, quirky friend. So thankfully, it's the tables have turned. But much of the real horrors of the film, how Laura is treated by others, are relatable. Her suffering does not exist in a bubble, even if she's silent about it. I even mentioned to Kat while we were watching the film that statistically, men are more likely to divorce their wives when they become ill. Okay. Of course, this doesn't apply to everyone, and women have been known to leave their husbands too. Like, I was even thinking of the film 50-50 with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And how, I think it was Bryce Dallas Howard. Oh, that's fun. 3 named people. Leaves him. She's like, I can't pick you up from your cancer treatment, you know? But statistically, it's simply more likely to happen to a woman. Yeah. And he was even brought up in Love is Blind recent season. All this to say, separating the supernatural and horror elements of the film, this scenario is incredibly relatable and believable, and there are women out there who are experiencing it in some form. So the metaphor of the monster representing Laura's emotions is both obvious and brilliant. By framing the story as a romantic comedy, we witness Laura's playful comedic growth as she learns to fall for the monster, and ultimately for herself. So at first, she allows the monster to have free reign, which is crazy. This is not her, like, this is her house. And she's like, yeah, I guess. Oh, you make sense. You live here. Like, you're louder than me. But as she begins to assert herself in these little ways, right? So, like, adjusting the thermostat to something more comfortable for herself, or playing her own song on the piano, like, on repeat, even when he's like, I hate this. That's my favorite scene. Like, I do not like this happening. But by doing those things, and it is a playful, just like kind of enemies to lovers scenario, but it's like enemy of yourself to lover of yourself, and so we see her confidence grow, and that's like really cute. And the monster pushes her to voice the injustices she's facing, eventually leading to a violent outburst at one of the sources of her rage, her ex. And in the film's haunting final scene, the lines between reality and imagination blur. Jacob confronts her angrily, accusing her of ruining his show, his reputation, and everything else. But Laura's response is silent yet powerful, leaving Jacob as a lifeless set piece for her long-awaited musical number. And in a world where white male rage is often loud and center stage, it's refreshing to see Laura's rage come through quietly yet triumphantly, leaving both the characters in the film and the audience in stunned belief. It was like, is this real? What's real? What happened? What's going on?
Is this a part of the play?
I'm like, is this a part of the movie? You know, like, what is real? What is fake? But I also think too, you know, there's that trend of how men write female rage, which is like loud and just like vicious, and it's almost a replication of male rage, which is allowed to be loud, but female rage is so often quiet and venomous, right? The same way that like female serial killers aren't like stabbing people a million times. Usually it's like poison. So I think like that, like having him come in and he's just blowing up and he's just loud and he's so violent in this confrontation, and then her violence is like, it has happened. And we have to catch up to be like, what? Because she's like, what? And instead, her anger is the song. Her anger is the injustice of what she experienced and saying, like, you tricked me. So I think, like, that was really brilliant in that part. And so ultimately, your monster succeeds in weaving together emotional depth with the intensity of supernatural horror. Your monster is ultimately a story about healing, the power of confronting our fears, and realizing that sometimes the monsters we're afraid of aren't just the ones lurking in the dark. They're the ones that we carry inside of us. And it's a perfect watch for fans of unconventional storytelling and for anyone who's ever felt the weight of their unresolved emotions. And Kat is going to tell us what that weight is like.
Yeah.
How to not lead to murdering someone on the stage.
It's poison.
This tacky, weird musical I didn't understand.
Yeah. It was also, like, so bold of him. To be like, I'm going to tell a story about the oppression of women, me, a man, who is oppressing women actively in my role as this antagonist in this movie. And I'm just like, bro.
I forget, he quoted someone at the start of their rehearsal, and I was like, he is not using that.
Because he thinks he's so cool.
I was like, this white man did not just use those words. I was like, it's saying a lot. I get it.
Yeah.
I get why she did what she did.
It's, like, so multifaceted. And, like, what you're saying, it's like, it's very much like white mediocrity gets center stage, and then she's just like, what the heck, man? Y'all don't deserve this. Like, I'm not saying that, like, the one chick, like, wasn't talented. I mean, she seemed like she did know how to do stuff, but, like, she didn't earn that role at all. She hadn't experienced that either. Yeah, and they were so frustrated with her, like, the whole time, too. So it's just like, it's a whole thing. But very much white mediocrity, and you're just like, dude, why are you literally the worst? And I guess it's because that's the whole point. Because he's been allowed. He's been allowed to be the worst, and he's actually been lauded for being the worst. Like, people have lifted him up as this voice of a generation. Meanwhile, anything good about that play was her. Literally. So we hate him here. It's just fine. Yeah, it made me think of when we covered Invisible Man, and, like, being, like, there was a lot of brilliance in that film. Like, there was really ingenious camera angles and approach to abuse and, like, in toxic relationships in that way. It was the ending that really took us out of it, because, like, even though it's a horror movie and all of that, like, that's not justice that it generally leads to the results that we want, leads to freedom and to finally recovering and healing. It leads to incarceration. It could lead to the death penalty. It could lead to you being harmed in a different way. So when we see, like, those revenge tales, and though this one isn't really explicitly that, because that's not what she wasn't, like, waiting to do that the whole time. No. It just kind of was like, this is just really clearly she blew up, it came to a tipping point and she's had enough, because the last thing that she had and was holding on to just broke, right? Like, how little she mattered to the people who mattered the most to her, just absolutely destroyed her. And so, yeah, I agree. It's just, like, very emotional, and, like, you feel for her, and even in that moment when she is, saying it's not fair and she's screaming and she's letting that out, that's just the one part of it. Like, the whole time you're, like, just wishing she told him off, and she never does. Yeah. She never does, like, because her response is she just kills him. She doesn't say, like, you were a piece of shit. You were actually a terrible person. For X, Y, and Z, and for treating me the way you have all the way until today. Like, never once changing or ever thinking of me as a person and treating me that way. Like, I guess she, like, kind of does that one time, but then they also, like, hook up, so it's like, it kind of took away the weight of it a little bit, because then it's like he still wins. I don't know. Especially because he knows that she got it wrong. He doesn't fix it. He doesn't, like, clarify it and, like, show her. He uses, like, her weakness for him to not, like, it doesn't get through. And so I think, if she could take more time, if her monster was just a little less, like, violent, Yeah.
Honestly, like him breaking his arm, I was like, heck yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we could have left it there. I was like, yeah, that's consequenceless violence. You know, he didn't know that she was the one who did it, you know? Yeah.
During a time, like, you know, like,
yeah.
It wasn't infidelity, but it was, you know, it was clear what was actually occurring. But yeah, like, and also, like, the way that he was holding that over even Jackie, like, he was very much a villain in a lot of this. The ending I'm envisioning in my head, my alternate ending is she gets out, she's fine. She's actually a star. I'm a star.
She gets all, like, the credit that she finally deserves. But, like, I get why they did the ending. Like, I'm not mad at the ending. Yeah. I want to clarify that. Like, I thought it served, like, a really good it really showcases unresolved rage and trauma and how that can really harm yourself and your relationships, even ones that, like, you know, they kind of deserve to be harmed, even if not murdered. It was very accurate. And entertaining. It was just sad.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's what film is for, so we can live out those fantasies. So we can put, like, insert face over to his face, and we get our justice wherever the person is, like, whatever apology you were waiting for. Maybe that's who we're seeing being murdered, and we can just maybe feel a little better because in this world that's not real, it happens.
Fantasy world.
Free of consequence. It fades to black before we ever see anything bad. Right?
Yeah.
That's what horror is for. It's a cathartic release. We get to win. In a very, like, intense, like, to the 10th, you know, degree. And I think that's what's beautiful about this. And
we're thankful they made a movie instead of murder. Yeah.
always. Yeah. Make a movie. Don't murder.